Hexagram number 52. Keeping still, mountain. Keep one's inner thoughts quiet and relinquish the childish heart. We receive this hexagram either when our thoughts are entangled with our emotions or when the situation is such that we may become emotionally involved. Once our emotions are involved, it becomes impossible to acquire clarity of mind. Thus, we are counseled to keep still. Keeping still means quieting the thinking of the heart. In the Ching, when our emotions are aroused, the heart is said to think. The childish heart thinks in terms of what it wants and needs, and of what it dislikes and wishes to avoid. It also thinks in defense of any pretensions we may have adopted. Thus, it is also the egotistical thinking of vanity and pride. It constantly measures and the direction and pace of events to see if its goals are being furthered. The object of keeping still is to quiet this frenetic, The object of keeping still is to quiet this frenetic and focused mental activity. If we could detach long enough to see such thoughts objectively, we would realize they arise from fears of the bodily self, some of which are conscious, some subconscious. The I Ching recognizes these thoughts as voices of the inferiors. So long as they dominate our mental space, it is impossible to attain neutrality and acceptance that leads to a correct and reasonable perspective. There are several ways in which we may quiet the inferiors. We may explain to them the need to be quiet so that clarity will be possible. We may tell them that they must not become confused by the appearances of things, that change is the rule of life. We may reassure them that they can be disciplined. We will draw the help of the higher power to make the impossible possible. We may explain the need for their obedience, as in the army in hexagram number 7, and that we must cling to the unknown to show the way, as the clinging in hexagram number 30. By encouraging them in such ways, we may attain their cooperation and perseverance. This method of limiting inferiors is called sweet limitation. As in limitation, hexagram number 60. To obtain these results, it may be necessary to sit quietly in the meditative state. Very often, receiving this hexagram is a call to meditate, or at least to get in touch with the worries and fears of our inferiors. The inferiors need to be reassured that if we will only trust the unknown and allow the creative to work through the vehicle of time, everything will work out correctly. Sometimes this work requires that we recognize our pretensions and pride, culprits that must be killed through firm perseverance. Again, I'm going to read that last sentence. Sometimes this work requires that we recognize our pretensions and pride culprits that must be killed through firm perseverance. Once we have come to a state of acceptance and docility, we attain the peacefulness described by the image in the joyous, shown in hexagram number 58, as the shining lake. Again, once we have come to a state of acceptance and docility, we attain the peacefulness described in the image, the joyous. The unruffled surface of the shining lake symbolizes the contentment of inner peace. The moment any emotion arises, a ripple is created on its surface. Keeping still also symbolizes the Ching way of meditating, which entails bringing oneself to a state of inner emptiness through systematically clearing out the clamoring voices of the inferiors. Keeping still, as meditation requires sitting in a relaxed but alert position so that the nerves of the backbone become quiet. The spinal column is not only the root by which the brain conveys messages to the body itself, it is also the pathway by which the bodily self conveys its complaints to the brain. By sitting in a self-supporting position, we remain awake while our body relaxes. As our blood pressure and energy subside, the inferiors become quiet as if asleep. At this point, ego separation occurs. The pretentious, defensive, assuming voice of the self-image separates from our consciousness so that we are able to hear its thoughts separately from ourselves. Its voice is sometimes subtle and tempting, sometimes strained and harping, sometimes demanding and furious. Ego separation gives us an opportunity to hear and understand the ego and its pretensions. Its pretensions. Ego separation gives us an opportunity to hear and understand the ego and its pretensions. An opportunity, forgive me. Once we understand, we can liberate ourselves from its domination. Once we have heard it in meditation, we can recognize it in its insinuations from the sideline during our everyday activities. Recognition enables us to resist its demands. Once the ego has separated, we may also see and hear inferiors. In listening to their concerns and complaints, we will notice that they are like children. Like children, they focus on wanting, wondering, and worrying. Body cells or organizations of cells have both verbal and nonverbal ways of telling us we are hungry, tired, or afraid. During normal conscious activity, we would think these thoughts to be integral to our makeup. In meditation, however, we hear and see them as separate from our central self. Through contacting them in meditation, we find that they have been under the control of our ego. We also find that now we are able to enlist them in working towards our goals of the higher self. In this way, our superior self, the superior man, gains the ability to command the inferiors. Once this happens, the personality resumes to its natural true order. Listening to needs of the inferiors and putting their fears to rest seems to reassure and pacify them, and our heart comes to neutrality and acceptance. We see or hear nothing. Sometimes it becomes possible to hear a new voice and to see new things. The new voice is the quiet, unobtrusive, but firm voice of the sage. We listen and watch as if we were waiting for a movie to begin. We may also see images that demonstrate the lessons of universal truth. While we may participate in what happens, we do not control it. Meditation is also the time in which we make sacrifices when we make sacrifices called for in various hexagrams, such as contemplation, hexagram 20. Sacrifice means to turn over to the higher power questions of inner conflict and emotions such as justifiable anger, the feeling of having rights, indignation due to injustice, impatience with evil, and our tendency to focus on the petty elements in others that tend to bring on the question, why are things this way? We sacrifice these feelings and perceptions because they obstruct progress and inhibit the general good. Such sacrifices enlarge the spiritual being. To the serious student of the I Ching, the daily practice of meditation is essential. Through meditation, we perform inner cleansing that returns us to purity and innocence, freed of thoughts that generate restlessness and inner defenseness. Through meditation, we perform the inner cleansing that returns us to purity and innocence, freed of thoughts that generate restlessness and inner deafness. We return to the alertness and inner attentiveness that makes it possible for us to interact with others in a creative way, freeing ourselves from preponderating concerns of the inferiors has the effect of cleaning our inner house. Just as our external house becomes dirty through living in it, our mental space becomes cluttered with extraneous and unnecessary preoccupations. These may consist of belief systems, concerns, fantasies, and false ideas that make inner peace and harmony impossible to achieve. Inner cleansing implies that we go of the world and its preponderating concerns, and we let go of all belief systems. We let go of old anger and hostility and any attachment to injuries people have done us. We discard all philosophies of negation and petty likes and dislikes. On cleaning our ting, in this manner we become freed of the enormous burden entailed by carrying such mental trash. If in trying to meditate we seek to achieve inner quiet without first performing inner cleansing, clarity and communications with the sage will not be possible. To bypass this step is to force meditation, as the third line warns. To practice daily inner cleansing is the daily self-renewal that enables the superior man to remain at the height of his powers. Through meditation, the sage allows us a glimpse our ego as an organized defense system that we, through abdicating leadership of our personality. I'm going to begin that again there. Through meditation, the sage allows us to glimpse our ego as an organized defense system that we, through abdicating leadership of our personality, have allowed our inferiors to construct in defense against the unknown. We are permitted to see one at a time the fears that give life and power to the ego. We see our fears both in the demonic disguises that enable them to terrorize us, and as the really harmless things they are. To unmask such fears in meditation is like discovering the Wizard of Oz in the act of manipulating his frightening machines from behind the curtain. Never again are they able to wield power over us. Since this sort of meditation seems indispensable to a serious study of the Ching, it is not surprising that Confucius said, "Study without meditation is labor wasted. Meditation without study is perilous." Changing line number 1. Keeping his toes still, no blame. Continued perseverance furthers. Wanting a thing to happen will not make it happen. Until conditions are correct, we should find peace and acceptance and keep steadfast and detached. Continued perseverance means that it will take time to correct matters. Meanwhile, we must not depart from what we know is true. Changing line number 2. Keeping his calves still. It is important not to do anything now because we are still being pressured by our ego to act. If we doubt that the correct way will work, or if we are caught up desiring something, we lose our inner independence. As long as fear, doubt, or desire pervade, any action will be wrongly motivated. He cannot rescue him whom he follows. If our inner eye is fastened on what another does, we follow his path rather than our own. We can only rescue him if we follow our own path. When he sees that he is truly alone in doing the wrong thing, with no one to rescue him but himself, he will cease to do the wrong thing. This line indicates that we must disallow our emotional self. It is often difficult to see that desire has its roots in fear and doubt. We desire only that we are unsure of getting. Perhaps we desire the equitable resolution of a situation, or the return of someone from who we have been separated. Perhaps we wish to escape an adversity that we fear may continue indefinitely. Adversity. Forgive me, adverses as the fire that clarifies and renders off the fat. I'm going to begin this again here. Perhaps we wish to escape an adversity that we fear may continue indefinitely. Adversity, we need to remember, lasts only for a time. Meanwhile, it serves as the fire that clarifies and renders off the fat. Our impurities of character, doubt of this eternal truth, tends to lock us into negative patterns. If we can let go of fear and doubt and distrust, progress will be made. Changing line number 3. Keeping his hips still. When we strive to trust or be quiet, we force a state of mind on ourselves. The way to composure is not to try to be something, but to work at freeing ourselves from any elements that make us more or less than what we really are. Usually these elements are pride or negative thoughts. We need not like people, for example, but it is important to disperse hostile feelings and come to a moderate and just view of them. This is to find the middle way and to come to an acceptance of life that is called noble-hearted, keeping still. Enforced quiet also means that we are still harboring worries and anxieties. We must let go of all pressing matters. Such resignation brings good luck, whereas dwelling on issues prevents it because the dark force still operates. When we make a great effort to find the negative element to be dispersed and still cannot find it, it will come through naturally if we keep our mind humble and free. To strive hard, even in trying to do the right thing, causes splitting apart, as shown in Hexagram number 23. Sometimes we think that to get rid of doubt, we must believe. This is yet another attempt to force tranquility on ourselves. It is impossible to replace doubt with belief. For when we have not really dealt with doubt, we have only covered it up, because doubt is still present. We are continuously forced to justify and defend the belief system that keeps it at bay. We also accept beliefs because they flatter us in some way and make us feel better. Sometimes we try to flatter the unknown by creating a belief system that we think will please it. In the primitive fantasy that worshipful obedience will placate it. Forgive me, I don't think I read that correctly. Sometimes we try to flatter the unknown by creating a belief system that we think will please it. In the primitive fantasy that worshipful obeisance will placate it. Obeisance, O-B-E-I-S-A-N-C-E. This is similar to the practice in primitive religions of sacrificing animals to placate angry or trickster gods. Indeed, with this view of the higher power, leaves us alone to our own devices. The Ching way is to let go of doubt and replace it with nothing. We humbly accept the unknown and offer no resistance to it. The trust needed is only an absence of distrust. Changing line number 4. Keeping still his trunk still. Keeping his trunk still. The presence of fear, doubt, or desire causes unrest. Desire is a form of fear that we may not achieve our goal. We hardly ever desire what we are sure of having, and often desire what we think we cannot have. Thus, desire contains both doubt and envy. In letting go of these negative feelings, we bring the heart to rest and attain a higher level of tranquility. Changing line number 5. Keeping jaws still. When we have not attained inner tranquility, our words and actions are bound to reflect the presence of fears, doubts, desires, impatience, or other restless forces. For example, we focus on others' failings. They sense our supervisory attitude and become more resistant to doing the right thing. Their increased resistance further unbalances us and makes it harder to persevere. Because of these and other bad effects of speaking or acting when we lack tranquility, we should make a special effort to be reserved in speech. Changing line number 6. Noble-hearted, keeping still. It is noble-hearted if, in spite of attacks by our inferiors who keep asking why, we turn our backs on them and keep still. Such perseverance leads to detachment and peace of mind. This ends hexagram number 52.